Rock dust exploded through the tunnel, swallowing the headlights of the trucks and turning the air into something the men could barely breathe. It was just after lunch on August 5th, 2010, deep inside the San Jose copper and gold mine in northern Chile. 33 miners were finishing routine work nearly half a mile under the desert when the mountain above them shifted. The floor jumped, steel groaned, and in seconds the main ramp that connected them to the surface was crushed by a falling block of rock. The driver of the lead truck slammed on the brakes. In front of him, the tunnel ended in a wall of broken rock and twisted supports. Radios went silent. Power flickered and died. When the dust settled enough for headlamps to cut a path, the men realized the truth. Their exit was gone. Shift foreman Luis Urzua ordered everyone back toward the mine's emergency refuge, a reinforced chamber deeper inside the hill stocked with basic supplies. Some men wanted to keep searching for another way out, but the air was unstable and the rock still moving. They followed the trucks to the refuge, headlights glowing weakly through the haze. Above them, roughly 2,000 feet of rock now separated them from daylight. Inside the refuge, they took stock. The chamber held oxygen canisters, first aid kits, a little fresh water, and food meant to last a small crew for a few days. Packets of tuna, milk, canned fruit, crackers. There were 33 of them. No one knew if the surface even knew they were alive. Urzua made the decision that would define the next weeks. They would ration as if rescue might take months. Each man would receive a few spoonfuls of food and sips of water per day, nothing more. On the surface, the first reports were grim. The mine, located near the city of Copiapó, already had a history of accidents and safety complaints. Rescuers tried to re-enter through the main ramp, but were stopped by unstable rock. Officials told the families gathered at the gate that conditions were extremely dangerous and that it might be impossible to reach anyone who had survived. The families refused to leave. They set up a camp in the desert and waited. Underground, hunger and heat set in. Temperatures hovered around 90 degrees. The air was damp and mixed with fumes. The men tried to rest on makeshift beds of rock and equipment. Arguments flared over food, over faith, over whether anyone would keep searching for them. To stay sane, they built routines. They held meetings where Urzua explained every decision. They prayed together. They cleaned tools and tunnels to keep busy and remove loose rock that could fall. Everyone understood that if discipline collapsed, they might not live long enough for rescuers to reach them. Above them, engineers began drilling narrow exploratory holes from the surface down toward the levels where the men might have retreated. Old maps were unreliable. Several holes missed. One hit an empty tunnel. Another broke and had to be abandoned. With every failure, the family's anxiety sharpened. Chilean President Sebastián Piñera visited the site and promised that efforts would continue as long as there was any chance of life underground. 17 days after the collapse, one of the slim drill bits finally punched through into the refuge area. Below, the men heard the strange new vibration in the rock. They gathered under the strongest section of roof and waited, staring upward. When the tip of the drill broke through, the chamber filled with dust and shouts. They tied a plastic bag and a note to the drill head before the crew withdrew it. On a scrap of paper, written in red marker, they printed the message that would soon circle the globe. Estamos bien en el refugio los 33. We are well in the refuge, the 33. The 33rd. When rescue officials read it at the surface, cheers, tears, and prayers erupted in the desert camp. Until that moment, no one knew if anyone was still alive. The first hole was too narrow for anything larger than small tubes, but it changed everything. Through that opening and others that followed, rescuers sent down water, nutrient gels, solid food, medicine, clothing, and lights. Doctors spoke with the men by video, checking for infections and giving simple exercise routines. The miners built sleeping areas and side tunnels, kept the main chamber as a work and meeting space, and appointed men to specific roles so no one sat alone with his fear. At the same time, engineers designed a way to pull 33 men up through nearly 700 meters of rock. Teams from Chile and abroad drew up 3 rescue plans using different drilling systems. The most promising Plan B used a Schramm T-130 rig that would first open a pilot hole and then widen it to a shaft large enough for a person. Drilling the escape shaft took weeks. The bit had to grind through hard rock, and breakdowns and deviations meant long delays. Underground, the miners felt each vibration and counted on every jolt. By early October, the Plan B shaft had reached the miners' level. Engineers lined the upper part with steel casing to prevent collapse and left the lower section in solid rock. A slender steel rescue capsule, painted in Chile's colors and named Phoenix, was lowered in tests. Its interior was barely wider than a man's shoulders, but held harnesses and communication lines. The tests worked. For the first time, a real exit existed. The miners agreed on the order of rescue. First out would be the men with medical issues and those whose skills could help if something went wrong. Foreman Luis Urzua insisted he would be the last to leave. On the night of October 12th, the capsule descended empty for the first real pickup. At the refuge level, the men crowded around it, touching the metal walls they had waited so long to see. Florencio Avalos strapped in first. As the cage began to rise, the others listened to the radio and stared at the dark shaft. At the surface, his family and a ring of cameras waited at the mouth of the tunnel. When the capsule emerged and the hatch opened, he stepped out into floodlights and applause, hugging his son and the rescuers who pulled him free. Around the world, viewers watched live as a man who had spent 69 days underground took his first steps back in open air. Trip after trip, the capsule went down and came back up. Each ride took about 15 minutes. Some miners emerged joking, others cried or dropped to their knees. Medics checked blood pressure, oxygen levels, and eyes that had adjusted to weeks of dim light. The men were thin and pale, but alive. Underground, with each successful lift, the group grew smaller and the tunnels quieter. Almost a full day after the first rescue, only a handful of men remained below. Last in line was Urzua. When the capsule returned for him, he climbed inside, took one last look at the chamber where they had rationed food and argued and prayed, and gave the signal. The cage rose through the shaft they had listened to being drilled inch by inch. At the top, he stepped out to cheers and embraces. All 33 miners were out. None had died underground. In the months that followed, investigators exposed poor safety practices and ignored warnings about unstable rock at the San Jose mine. Many of the men struggled with nightmares, anxiety, and health problems tied to their ordeal. Some used their sudden fame to tell their story, others chose quiet lives away from the cameras. But their survival remained a rare outcome in major mine disasters, made possible by discipline below ground and relentless work above it. 69 days after the collapse, the desert that had first held a silent, sealed hill ended up holding a camp that watched 33 men return from a place most people never leave alive. Thank you for listening to horrifying survival stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.